Hey there, I'm Sunny, and this is how to make a top-down 2D RPG in Unity. Welcome to Episode 8, Further Player Animations. In this tutorial, we'll be adding in the remaining player movement animations and covering a couple of other useful things too. Okay, so next up, let's go ahead and rig up the player's animations for moving up and down. So if we go ahead and run the game, we can take a look that when we're moving left and right, that's animating out correctly for us, both in terms of the movement and the idle. But when we move up and down, we're getting no such additional animations coming in there. So let's fix that. So first, what we're going to want to do is come down here into the project panel. We're going to want to go player, visuals, sprites, okay, and we're going to want to take a look at these. Now you can find these in the itch.io page, that'll be in the description below. Don't worry, you don't have to make any of these. You can use them all. I've made these for you, so you don't have to. Anyway, what we're going to do is exactly the same process as what we did before. We're going to go ahead and select the first one, shift click and select the last one, and ours is using 4 frames here, so we've selected these 4 frames, and then we're just going to click and drag those into the scene. Okay, and then Unity is going to prompt us to name this animation, and we're going to use the Epic Games naming convention where we go from the least specific to the most specific. As we go between each of these identifiers, we separate with an underscore. You don't have to use this, and it's by no means like the best way of doing it, but it is pretty handy for naming things consistently across different types of objects and making it easy to find things because you can just search them because you know you've used consistent naming. Anyway, this is going to be anim underscore player underscore move, and then this one is for when we're moving down. Okay, so here anim underscore move underscore player underscore move underscore down, and then we go ahead and hit save, and we're going to do the same again down here. Select that first one, shift click on that last 4th frame for this one, and we're going to do the same again where we go anim underscore player underscore move, and then this is for when we're moving up, and we can see the back of the player here, which makes sense. So what we'll do next is we'll go ahead and clean up our game objects it's made for us. We don't need those. We also don't need these additional animation controllers it's made for us. Okay, and we're gonna do something now to make our lives a little easier. We're gonna use this little slider down here, and we're gonna just drag that all the way to the left, and it's gonna collapse this into a list view. Okay, that's gonna mean we can see these a little easier with their full names. Okay, and as we did before, okay, we are going to duplicate the movement animations and use those to form the idle animations by removing a couple of frames. So we're gonna grab the move down, we're gonna control D and then F2 to rename, and we're just gonna rename this to idle down. Okay, and then we're gonna do the same again with the up. We're gonna control D, F2, and then rename that into idle. Okay. So we've got our all animations now. So the next step is we're going to want to add these to the player's animation controller. So I'm just going to select that, and then I'm just going to double click it. That's going to give us the graph to work with. And we're just going to do the same as what we did before. We're just going to drag and drop in all of our animation clips. Okay. And now because we're controlling this in script, we don't need to set up any links between them, right? We're not using the animator controller in the traditional way. We're using it where we control it purely via script, and it simply acts as a container for us to contain all of the relevant animations. Okay, just makes our life a little bit easier with pixel art, where we don't need complex transitions. And we're happy to manage them inside of script. So here we've got idle down, idle up, and move up. Okay, and what we'll do now is just go ahead and edit those animations. Okay, so we'll go over to our animation panel over here, and if you don't have this, by the way, you've got these 3 little dots down here. You just click those, add tab, animation. Okay, and that'll add in a new animation tab for you, right? And what we'll be doing here is editing those animations out. So to do that, in our hierarchy, we're going to want to go player, visuals, and then character. So we're basically going to want to select the game object that has the animator on it. Okay, so if you set yours up differently, don't worry, that's fine. You're just looking for the game object with the animator on. With that game object selected, our animator will now show the correct animation for us, and we can even go ahead and drag this along, and it will change in the viewport over here. If we just zoom in a little there, it'll change and update there for us, and we can preview our animation in real time. Okay, so what we're gonna want to do is select our idle down first. Okay, and just to show that a little better, it's this little drop down menu here, and then idle down is what we're gonna do first. We're just gonna select that, and we're gonna select the second keyframe and hit delete, select the fourth keyframe, hit delete, and then holding this remaining keyframe at the end, we're just gonna click and drag it over to the left. Okay, this is the workflow that I'm using for this. By no means do you have to do it this way. You could, spread this animation out over more time, but we actually control the speed of it via the animation controller for us by adjusting the speed of the animation clip instead of trying to do it here on the graph, which can be, it depends on how you like to do it. I prefer to do it that way, but I can understand if you prefer to just use the graph. So we're going to do the same again. So this was down, so we're going to select idle up. Okay, and then select that keyframe on the second, keyframe on the fourth, delete, and then drag it across. Boom, we're done. So now that we've done that, we'll go back over to our animation controller. And if we look before, we actually came up with values for these that worked well before. And because our animations are using the same amount of keyframes, we can now use those same values. So for the idle, we've got 0.15. So I'm just going to go ahead and change that to 0.15. Enable my numpad, 1 sec, 0.15, and then 0.15. Okay, and then down here, we said for the movement, 0.7 seems to work. So again, we'll just go 0.7, and we'll select the next one, and then we'll go 0.7. Okay, that sorts us out there for the remaining animations set up. Okay, but if we go ahead and run the game, you'll notice that unfortunately, they're still not playing, and that's because we're gonna need to go in and edit the script so that we can actually make use of these. Okay, so going over to our script now, I'm just gonna zoom this in a little bit so that we can see it a little clearer. We'll notice first, if we come up to the top here, that we've got our private read-only ints, which represent the hashed values of those animations, which both move and idle to the right. Okay, so I'm just gonna go ahead and copy those, and then I'm gonna paste those down, and we're gonna replace these with first up. Okay, so we've got anim move up, anim idle up, and then over here, we're just gonna, same again, replace that out with up. And we're gonna control V again, and we're gonna go ahead and do down, and down, and we're gonna come over here, do down, and down. Okay. Now we've got all of our animations cached in here so that we can reference to them. What we're gonna wanna do next is set up our logic to actually be able to make use of them. So if we scroll all the way down, we've got our update animation down here, okay? And at the moment, we've got a very simple approach we're using, where we're detecting if our movement direction that is coming in from when we're pressing WSD or the arrow keys, we're forming a vector 2, which I've explained in an earlier video, and we're detecting if that magnitude, the square magnitude of that is greater than 0, okay? In that event, it just means we're pressing one or more keys, at which point we're deciding that we are, in this particular case, we're going to be moving, okay? So what we're gonna do here then is first, we're gonna change this a little bit so that we can make use of a switch statement to be able to easily pick out the animation we want without our code turning into a bit of a mess of if statements, okay? In this case, we would need quite a few if statements if we were just going to rely on those. So instead, we're going to use a switch statement. So first, we're going to take this here. I'm going to control an X to cut that. We're just going to bake that conditional into a variable. So I'm going to use the keyword var, which is where we allow Unity to, or in this case, C#, we allow C# to determine the type of a variable based on the context of how we're using it, okay? And I'm gonna call this is moving, okay? And I'm gonna set this equal to that conditional that we've got there, okay? And if we cursor over this, by the way, it does detect that it is a Boolean that we do want, and that is what we want. We want to know, are we moving? Yes or no, okay? True or false. And we're just gonna hold that in a variable. And this is going to have the benefit now of A, we don't have to repeat this code a number of times, which can lead to all manner of issues when you're duplicating code. But also, we've wrapped this up into a nice little human readable text, right? So this makes our code much more readable. So next, what we're going to do is form our switch statement, okay? And we're going to do switch, and then I'm using tab here to autofill this out, by the way, in case you're wondering. And in here, I'm gonna do facing direction, which we've already defined earlier on in an earlier video. And I'm just gonna hit enter, and then I'm gonna hit tab again, or enter again, and then Visual Studio is gonna auto-complete this for me. You can type this out yourself, it's not a problem. You don't have to use the autocomplete, okay? So basically what this is saying is this is just an elegant if statement. It's saying if this facing direction is equal to directions.up, down, left, and right. And it also gives us an opportunity to declare a case where maybe it isn't equal to any of those. Luckily for us, we're using an enum, and we know that is never going to be the case. So with this default, we're going to leave it in just to be safe and just to be good coders, but we know that hopefully it should never reach that. But how are we going to set it up in a minute? It doesn't matter. So basically what we're doing next is we're gonna want a variable. Again, we're gonna use a keyword var here because we're being, we're being a little lazy, but it's no problem. We're gonna call this animation, and this is the animation that we're going to end up using. And we're gonna define it here because our switch statement is basically gonna determine which animation is gonna sit in this value, this variable for us, and then at the end of it, it's gonna pass that across to the animator, okay? So here, we're just by default gonna set this to be underscore anim underscore move and to the right. Okay, and it will matter because of how the code's set up above anyway. Like, it doesn't really matter what default value you use here, but by using this value, we make the context aware of what we want to hold in this, which is an int. Okay, so, I guess we could just define 0 for that, but I want to be safe. I want to use an existing hashed int just in case, okay? So basically, our job now in each of these cases is to determine what animation should be equal to, okay? Now, when we set a variable equal to something, we don't have to just give it a value. We can actually use logic within this assignment operation, okay? So we can say the animation is going to be equal to something based upon some condition. And this is called a ternary operator, by the way, in case you want to look it up and get a little bit more familiar with it. But we're going to say is moving, okay? If we are moving, okay, so if is moving is true, so this is actually going to be shorthand for this, okay? But we're not going to declare it as equal to true because that is what this means. We're going to use the question mark. This starts the ternary operator, and it says, okay, if we are moving, then what do you want to do? Now we know that in this case, we're moving up and we're moving. So therefore the anim move up is what we want, okay? But if we're facing up, but we're not moving, then we're gonna want anim idle up, okay? And this now, this integer value here, which represents the animation, is going to use our isMoving variable over here to determine which animation we want, right? And this is super elegant, right? This is really, really nice and concise, but also critically, everything here should be readable, okay? When you look at this, we're not using anything that's really, really esoteric, okay? Everything's nicely labeled where we know what is happening. We've made sure that like anything that is a little bit uncertain, we've wrapped it up into a human readable context, right? And we've given ourselves that advantage when we come to debug, okay? So I'm going to use Control D to duplicate, and then I'm going to hold Alt, and I'm going to use the arrow keys. That's going to let me move this line up and down. Your IDE may be different, may be configured different, at which point you'll just want to copy and paste. But here we're going to say, okay, same again, animation. Are we moving? If so, and this is the directions down, we're going to use down. Okay, and idle, we're going to use down. Okay, and then again, Control D, and we're going to go down here to left, and we're going to do here. Now, this is a little different because we're using right, and the reason we're using right there is because we actually, just a little bit further up here, we actually flip the sprite depending on which direction we're moving. So we don't have a left animation, we only have a right animation, because when we are moving left, we flip the sprite so that we can make use of just one animation instead of requiring two. Now here, what we would actually do is something like this, right? Where basically in each of these cases, we would just reuse this same moving right. But when we're programming, it's really bad practice to be having lines that are duplicated that are exactly the same. It can introduce issues, and it makes problems when you come to make changes later. You have to do more work when you come to change it later, right? You start to increase the maintenance costs. So instead of doing that, what a switch statement allows us to do is these cases can actually be chained together. So again, holding Alt and using the arrow keys, we can actually move these cases around, okay? And now what we've done is effectively formed an if-else, or use the or operator is probably a better analogy. We're actually saying here, okay, is the case left, right, or is it just none of the above? In those cases, then we're going to use this right hand animation, this right facing animation. Okay, and again, we're aiming for elegance here, okay? And it's not because we want to overcomplicate this in any way. We're just trying to make it so we've not written hundreds and hundreds of lines of code to do something that is relatively simple and straightforward, which is just selecting the correct animation based upon what input we're giving, okay? If we did use many, many if statements, this code would just become more cumbersome to work with, okay? Instead, we're using some really nice condensed forms of if statements here, and that's what the switch statement and the ternary operators are. They're just ways to condense an if statement, which is ultimately an option of branching your logic, right? So that's all we're doing here. So what we can do now is I'm just gonna grab one of those lines. I'm gonna delete all of that. We just want this animator crossfade, okay? But instead of the idle right, we're just gonna send in the animation, okay? So this whole logic chain here, all of this that we've just done, is simply to determine which animation we want to use. It's nice and easy, really, really nice and easy, okay? And we've got all the other necessary logic above us to be able to make use of this. However, at no point in time do we ever set our direction here to be facing up and down. Okay, so we're just going to make one more edit. Okay, I'm going to be a little cheeky here. I'm going to Control-C, Control-V that. Okay, and instead of movedir.x, I'm going to deal with the y. Okay, and we're going to say here, if it is greater than 0, then we will be moving up. Okay, and we'll do directions up. And otherwise, we'll be moving down. So we'll do this to down. Okay, and we'll just double check this, that we did in fact label all these correctly. Okay, and we'll go ahead now and run the game. Okay, and we'll take a look-see at everything we've just done. So all as we did, set up those animations, went ahead, we set up the code to be able to make use of the animations, and now let's take a look what we've got. Okay, this is perfect, right? As we move around, okay, we've got the character able to animate up, able to animate down, and then we've got right and we've got left. Okay, that's perfect. And we can also move in the diagonal. Okay, and when we do move in the diagonal, you'll notice that precedence is given to the up and down animations. Okay, now you may want that, right? You may want the up and down animations to have that precedence. If you don't though, then you simply need to do else if here instead. And what'll happen then is what was happening before is this logic was executing last and therefore was able to overwrite effectively the movement direction, right? By setting it to else if, we actually give priority over to the horizontal direction. So if we just go ahead and test that now, okay, and I'm gonna move diagonally, exactly the same as I was before, I'm moving diagonally. You'll notice now though, that when I move diagonally, the priority is given to the horizontal animations, right? It's not affecting anything else. We don't have to worry, it's not affecting anything else, but it is giving priority to the horizontal animations. Now, depending on how you want your game to look stylistically, it is a design choice. You can set that up however you want. Okay, next up, we've got the Sprite Atlas. Okay, I've had a lot of people asking about the lines that appear. You see them here, right? You see the small white lines. These can also appear as small black lines, okay, that appear just randomly. If we run the game and we move around, sometimes they disappear, sometimes they reappear. They can appear in different orientations, okay? It's just not a great look, right? And some people have been asking, how do you fix that? Well, in order to fix that, if we just go into our project panel over here, it's actually really, really straightforward. So I'm gonna go game, and I'm gonna go core, okay? And then I'm gonna create a new folder, and I'm just gonna call this visuals, okay? Now for me, what I include here is any kind of visuals that are relevant to the game as a whole. Okay, so it might be like the title logo of the game, or something where we're going to use it in a whole bunch of different places and it doesn't make sense to allocate it to just one thing or another. But in this case, we're actually going to we're going to go into the create menu, and then we're going to go to 2D, and we're going to go Sprite Atlas. Okay, and now I'm just going to call this Atlas _ main. Okay, now with our Sprite Atlas, okay, what it's going to do is it's going to take whatever sprites we give it and it's going to pack them into a texture for us. Okay, and then when it sends it off, when the game sends that texture atlas off to the GPU, okay, it'll do so with the texture atlas instead of all of the different textures for the game. Okay, and it comes with a whole number of benefits, but one is that it removes those white lines. Those are caused by a couple of issues. It's a combination of floating point inaccuracies and also combination with the GPU sometimes reading from neighboring pixels outside of a sprite. Because when it's coming to read them, it's using what's called bilinear filtering, and this can lead to all manner of different weird artifacting. The fundamentals of it are not super relevant. They can be, so I do encourage you to go look them up, because there can be strange things which come even from the Sprite Atlas. But honestly, it's not super like big deal. We just make an atlas, right? And then we come over here into the inspector, and then we go ahead and we're going to disable compression, okay, and we're going to change filter mode to point. This is just the same as our when we bring in those pixel art assets, right? That's just the same as when we bring those in, okay? And critically though, it's this here objects for packing. Now you can drag and drop, or you can just use the plus icon here, but we're just going to look for our tile map, okay? And it's here. It's this top-down base tiles. We're just going to select that from the list, okay? And then we're going to hit pack preview, and it's just going to add all of those in for us, okay? And now, if we go ahead and run the game, we should hopefully not see any more of those white lines appearing, okay? I'm pretty confident we fixed that there. If we just go ahead and stop the game running, you'll notice you can see them here before the game is running, but when we control P and we run the game, okay, they should now be gone, okay? We should not experience those whilst playing the game anymore, okay? And again, that is an issue with floating point inaccuracies, and it's to do with filtering modes that occur on the GPU when it's reading from texture data, okay? And we can fix that with this Sprite Atlas. So if you see those flickering lines, just make a Sprite Atlas and throw in any sprites you've got that are to do with your terrain, where you're using them and you're copying them a lot of times next to one another. It's useful for those. It does bring performance increases, by the way, because we're only sending one draw call across. It's not a draw call, but we're only sending one texture across for the GPU to then read from. Okay, so it does help to improve performance for our game. Okay, so that fixes that problem for us. Okay, finally, I just want to go over this little square here. I just like to make that something that is not a white square. Okay, that's just doing my head in a little bit. Let's change that so that we can turn this into a barrel. Okay, so what we're going to want to do is first we're going to want to create the sprite for this. Now don't worry, we actually already have it in our sprite sheet. So if we go world, forest, and then sprites, and we take a look at our top-down base tiles, and we go ahead and open that in the sprite editor, okay? And we just take a look in here, right? We actually already have a barrel sprite in here. However, you'll notice that it's divided into two tiles, okay? Now, I don't want to edit this. And we can edit this to encompass the barrel and make it so that we can use the barrel like that. We can do that. However, because we've used this to make a tile map, if we go and start editing up things like that, it can wreak havoc on our tile map sometimes. Not always. Sometimes it's okay, but sometimes it can change the order of tiles, which will in turn potentially change the order in which they're put down in the level. Now, I've had this happen only very rarely, so what I like to do is if I need this sprite changed, I'm just gonna make that as like a separate sprite, okay? And I'm not gonna worry about the fact I'm reduplicating them, okay? So that's just for what I like to do to play on the safe side. It's not necessary, right? You can edit that if you want, but I would recommend backing up first, right? Every project you do should be connected to GitHub. Okay, this project I'm using to show you everything is connected to GitHub, and we make extensive use of it, right? Because like when I record these tutorials, I have to do several takes of them, right? Everything you're seeing here, I've done like 4 times in a row so that I can try and be as eloquent as I can and not have to and my way through it where possible. So yeah, so I make extensive use of GitHub. I would highly recommend connecting it in. I'll do a tutorial on that in the future. But yeah, so for now, what we're going to do is open this up in Sprite. Okay, we're going to zoom in. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to grab this sprite. Just going to wrap it up there. I'm going to Control C, okay, and then Control N, and that's just make a new sprite. Okay, I'm going to hit enter, and then I'm going to paste that in. And Control D is to deselect. So we've now got our barrel sprite in here, okay? With our sprite there, we're just gonna do save as, okay? And in here, we will go to our project and we'll navigate over just to the root game for now. We will make a new folder in a minute. So I'm gonna prefix with this T underscore because it's a texture, okay? And that's a common thing in Unreal to do. To prefix textures with that T underscore. You don't have to do that. You could use any kind of naming convention you like, but I'm going to do T underscore barrel.png. Okay, I'm going to hit save. We're going to go back over to the engine. We're going to go find that. So here it is. Okay, now something important to note here, and I'm not entirely sure why this is, but Unity 6 seems to have some strange import settings. It seems to always set the sprite mode to multiple for me. I don't know if that's just me maybe, but just do be aware of that. So I'm going to set that to single, to 16. I'm going to set it to point no filter, and then I'm also going to disable the compression on it because I don't need that. I'm going to go ahead and hit apply. Okay, so now that set up our sprite to be all rigged up nice. So I'm just going to go over to our square here in the hierarchy and over to our sprite render, and I'm just going to drag and drop that in. And you can see immediately we've got our barrel in here. Okay, so this is looking good. But let's tidy this up first. I don't like having stray files. I'm going to create a new folder. I'm going to call this objects, because we might end up with some more. Okay, inside of objects, we'll have barrel. Okay, inside a barrel, we're going to have a couple of folders in here. I'm going to have visuals. okay? And that's where we're gonna put our sprite that we just made. So I'm gonna click and drag, and I'm gonna use this side menu here to help me. And if we just expand that first, and then I can drop that straight into visuals there. So then I don't have to navigate through everything. I'm gonna go out of that. I'm gonna create another one. I'm gonna call this prefabs. Now what we're gonna do is we're gonna rename our square to barrel, okay? And we've got our barrel set up so that it is, you know, we can push it around if we just play the game for a minute, okay? We can push this barrel around, okay? So all good. It's still working exactly the same as before. It's just got a sprite now. Okay, but what we're gonna do is turn this into a prefab. So I'm gonna click and drag from the hierarchy into the project panel. Okay, and now this is now turned it into a prefab. Okay, and what that allows us to do is I can just drag in as many barrels as I want. Okay, and these are gonna come in with everything set up. Okay, so critically, it's got the collider, the rigid body, it's got everything we want. Okay, but more importantly, if I want to make a change to all of these barrels, okay, I can just come in here. I want it to be a red barrel now. Maybe it's explosive, right? I've changed it on the prefab. So I've selected the prefab. And by the way, we can double click this and it'll open into its own editor where we can then access, you know, any children of this object. We can access those and we can make changes much easier. And then at the top here, there's a little arrow and you can click that and you can go back out of that menu. So yeah, so we can come in here, we can make changes. We can have a red barrel or, you know, just a standard barrel, whatever, right? But the beauty of it is now when we play, these things are all set up exactly how we just got them set up, right? You know, so we can move these around. They can interact with one another, right? So the barrels can push each other because they're all physics objects, all using that same physics system, all with colliders, okay? And it might be nice if maybe, like with the player, we shrunk the collider down a little bit so that they weren't, you know, like this, where they're sort of like phantom interacting, but it's because of their colliders, right? If we look here, this makes sense. Because their colliders are represented by a box, okay? Those two boxes are intersecting at this point, so that actually makes sense as to why this sort of phantom interaction is going on here. It's just the collider shape. Again, probably like the player, we shrink that about halfway down, and then maybe to make a little bit more sense when they're being pushed around. But yeah, so we've got that now. You can add in as many barrels as you want. If you find more sprites around, right, you can easily create more types of barrels with different sprites. And if you wanted to make a different prefab, for example, so let's, for example, say we're not going to have a great sprite as an example here, but we'll just use one of these purple flowers. If we wanted to make this purple flower now into its own prefab, again, we've changed it out. We've changed the sprite out, right? So we're going to rename this to purple flower. Okay, and then what we're going to do is drag and drop that into our project, and it's going to say, hey, do you want to make an original one? Okay, or do you want to make it a variant, right? And what a variant is, what you can think of that is like, it's a child prefab of the original one. So it'll keep note of the original prefab settings, but it'll be its own distinct variant of it. So if we change something in the parent, it would propagate to this variant, but only if we haven't specifically changed it in the variant. So in the variant, because we've changed the sprite, if we changed it in the parent, that wouldn't propagate down. Okay, but you know, for in this case, we'll just go with an original one, and then we've got two distinct ones because maybe we want the flowers to do something really unique, right? Like maybe the flower like releases pollen or something when the player walks over it. But because it's got the colliders and everything, we just move that around, right? So now the flower is just another movable object, right? Maybe we're a gardener, mage, right? Who just so happens to fucking love barrels, and has a fascination with moving purple flowers around, right? But yeah, that's something we can do. Okay, I'll cover that in more detail in another video as well. but just so you know, at least now you know how we can go ahead and get some nice sprites in there for stuff like the barrels, and you can start making some cool things with this already. So that's our player now able to animate in all directions, and we've refined a few additional things to make our project more interesting. In the next tutorial, we'll build a gem currency system and a UI widget akin to rupees from the Legend of Zelda games. If you're enjoying these tutorials, drop me a comment or hit me up on Discord and let me know what other madness you'd like to peer into. Thanks for watching, boys, and see you next time.